Hello, friends. Hope you all are doing well in this pandemic. I guess it's been third day. You all are listening to so many important lectures in this national workshop on CSIR-UGC-NET-JRF and LS preparation in life sciences, organized by Botany for You, which is a very famous online platform for the students of life science. My name is RAVI DABHADE and I work as assistant professor in Shivaji College of Arts, Commerce and Science, Akola. You can note down my contact details so that at the end of the lecture, if you have any doubts, you can mail me regarding those. Right? Yes, of course, I can't go ahead without expressing my gratitude towards the entire managing committee of this national workshop. So I'm very much thankful to entire team who has given me an opportunity to interact with so many aspirant students of this CSIR-UGC NET examination. So thank you so much. My topic of discussion is a central dogma. We all know that the human genome, it consists of 3 into 10 to the power 9 base pair, which are present on 23 pairs of chromosome, and within these 23 pairs of chromosome there is an existence of about 30,000 genes, each of this gene coding for certain protein. And there are certain non-coding sequences also, which we popularly call them as introns. There is a percentage wise, if you consider, 95% of the genome represents intron, non-coding sequences, and only 5% of the genome is actually a coding sequence. That means this 30,000 genes, they are actually from this 5%. But it's not like these introns are of no use. Recently, scientists have found out that this 95% of genome, even though we call them as a junk, but still they are having a role of controlling the expression of certain genes. Well, if you consider these all 30,000 genes, the functional product of all these genes is nothing but a protein. That means we are getting protein from the DNA, right? So from DNA, if you want to get a protein, we need to travel through two important concepts called as transcription and a translation. First, we are getting RNA from the DNA that we will be looking at under a heading or under a concept called as transcription, and from RNA we are getting a protein. So that's nothing but a translation. RNA polymerase, the most crucial enzyme required for the transcription. Well, it has 5 subunits: beta, beta prime, alpha 1, alpha 2 and omega. These 5 subunits make core enzyme. Plus, if we add the sigma subunit, which binds and releases to RNA polymerase as and when it is required, it is called as holoenzyme. Largest among all these 5 is a beta prime, which actually provides the active site for the entire RNA polymerase. The second largest subunit is nothing but a beta, which helps the RNA polymerase to bind to the template DNA. And third largest are this alpha 1 and alpha 2, both of which are having 2 domains, NTD and CTD, amino terminal domain and carboxy terminal domain. NTD, it helps in the entire assembly of the RNA polymerase. That means all these 5 subunits and the 6 subunit, they are actually assembled together with the help of this NTD. And CTD, well, this helps the RNA polymerase to recognize the promoter region, which is actually crucial for the binding. And this omega subunit, entire RNA polymerase is actually stabilized with the help of this subunit. Now let's discuss the transcription. Broadly speaking, it is divided into 2 different steps. First is formation of pre-mRNA and second formation of functional mRNA from this pre-mRNA. We will look at both. Formation of pre-mRNA, it is also divided into 3 different phases. Okay, initiation, elongation and termination. The first, initiation, is composed of 3 different steps or phases, you can say. First is closed complex, where you can see that RNA polymerase, it will come and bind to the promoter region, and DNA over here is still double stranded. Then in a second you will have the transition of this closed complex into an open complex. It is because there is a separation of DNA, double stranded DNA, over a distance of about 13 base pair around a start site, and this structure look like a bubble, therefore it is called as transcription bubble. And in the last there is a initial transcribing complex. In this you can see that polymerase, it is still there, it doesn't escape the promoter. First 2 ribonucleotides, they are brought in active site and they are aligned on a template. Likewise, subsequent ribonucleotides, they are also incorporated in a growing DNA, growing RNA, and about 10 or so ribonucleotides, they are added, and this short transcript is then released. Yes, unfortunately this short transcript is released. It is because the exit channel of the RNA polymerase, it is actually blocked by the sigma factor. Therefore the newly growing RNA strand or the transcript, it cannot exit from the RNA polymerase active site due to certain reason, unknown reason. When this sigma factor, it is released from the RNA polymerase, then the RNA polymerase start transcribing a transcript, this time which will have more number of ribonucleotides present into it. Okay, well, the question over here is how the RNA polymerase, it recognizes the promoter region and starts the transcription. Okay, the answer to this is the presence of some consensus sequences which are actually conserved through many generations, right? So how to remember the presence of all these consensus sequences? For this we will label the first ribonucleotide as a +1, okay, which is a part of our actual gene which we want to transcribe. The first ribonucleotide, if you name it +1, then towards the 5' we will number them as -1, -2, -3, and towards the 3' end we will label them as +1, +2, +3. Okay, so if you travel towards 5' end, these 3 elements, which one? The first is -10, second is -35, and then the up element, all these are helping for the recognition of the promoter region, right? Especially the first, -10 and -35. If there is absence of -35, in that case the up element, it also exists. So this is what I am saying, -10 over here and -35 over here, and then lastly we have the up element. All right, so how does the RNA polymerase recognizes these elements, -10, -35 and up element? Well, answer to this question, it is given by the 2 subunits or various subunits of RNA polymerase. Which one? Especially the sigma factor and the alpha subunit. If we look at the sigma factor, it has 4 different regions: region 1, region 2, region 3 and region 4. Out of this, region 2 and region 4, they are responsible for recognizing the -10 and -35 elements of the promoter respectively, right? How does the sigma 4 recognizes the -35 element? Well, the answer is there are 2 helices which are present in this region number 4, and they are present in the super secondary format. Okay, one out of that is a helix turn helix. So these 2 helices, they are present in the helix turn helix format, and one of this helices, it literally enters into the major groove of the DNA and interacts the bases which are actually present in the -35 region, and the other helices or the other helix, it actually make contact with the DNA backbone by lying across the top of the groove. So this is the way in which the sigma region number 4 interacts with the -35 element of the promoter region. And how does the sigma 2 recognizes -10? Well, see, in this region there are maximum number of essential aromatic amino acids which are present, and they can interact with the different bases which are present in the non-template strand, which is exactly in front of the -10. So you can say that this is an indirect interaction with the -10. And then lastly you have the CTD, which is one of the domain of the alpha subunit. So this carboxy terminal domain, it can recognize the up element of the promoter region. This is how the RNA polymerase can recognize the promoter and bind to it. Elongation. This is the second phase of the formation of pre-mRNA. In this, if you see, the various ribonucleotides, they are entering into the active site through their defined given channel, and they are added into the growing RNA chain, and all this process is actually, the sequence of all these ribonucleotides is guided by a DNA strand. If you look at only 8 to 9 ribonucleotides, they are actually remaining in contact with the DNA, whereas the rest of the RNA, it is literally peeled off and directed out from the enzyme through its exit channel. And it has been seen that there are two different proteins called as GRE factor and the NUS protein. They are actually helping the polymerase enzyme for the elongation. Well, this complete elongation process has to be monitored, right, so as to maintain the fidelity, and this can be done by proofreading. And there are two ways of proofreading how the RNA polymerase can does this. The first is a pyrophosphorylatic editing. In this, if you look at the enzyme, it uses its active site. In a simple back reaction, it catalyzes the removal of all those nucleotides which are incorrectly inserted, and then followed by the replacement of these incorrectly inserted ribonucleotides by a correct ribonucleotides. For this, it requires a pyrophosphate, and that is why it is called as pyrophosphorylatic editing. Second, if you look at, is a hydrolytic editing. In this, the polymerase literally travel back, and it can remove one or maybe more than one nucleotides in which there are chances of having incorrect ribonucleotides, and after removal, then the same enzyme can then add the correct ribonucleotides. Okay, so this is called as hydrolytic editing. There can be situation where the DNA is damaged. Under certain situation, there is a need that the transcription should be halted, it should be arrested, and the entire RNA polymerase machinery, it stops the transcription over there, and the another repair enzymes, they will come, they will repair the damaged site, and then the complete transcription, it is then resumed at that place. Best example over here, if you look at the UVR-ABC system, right? In case of bacteria, both the removal of the RNA polymerase and recruitment of the repair enzyme, these are done by a protein called as transcription-coupled repair factor, right? So this is transcription-coupled repair. Now let's see the termination. Termination, it is brought about by two different ways, row dependent and row independent. Well, there are certain sequences within the DNA immediately after the actual gene. They are called as stop signals. During the transcription, when the RNA polymerase meets these sequences, the entire RNA polymerase dissociates from the DNA, and the respective RNA-DNA hybrid, it is then separated from each other. So we will see first the row dependent termination of the transcription. As we all know, Rho is a hexameric ATP requiring protein, and within the within the RNA which has been transcribed, there are certain sequences which are rich in CCC. There are multiple site delete over there, so they are also called as root or row utilization sites, because these are the actual sites where this row protein can come and bind. And there are certain sequences, row sensitive pause sites. These are nothing but our stop signals, and they are somewhere 100 nucleotides away from the root site. So row induces a conformational change in the polymerase, and it causes the enzyme to terminate the transcription process. So how is the process? Rho literally pushes the RNA polymerase, and at the same time it pulls the RNA strand. So two things, it is pushing the RNA polymerase away from it, and it is pulling the RNA, newly growing RNA strands towards it. So these two things results into the dissociation of the hybrid, that is DNA and RNA. So it is row dependent. On the contrary, if you look at the second type of termination, that's nothing but row independent. There is no requirement of any external protein, and that's why it is called as intrinsic termination. It requires the presence of two various consensus sequences, right? One of them is called as short inverted repeat, which is made up of about 20 nucleotides, and second is a stretch of about around 8 to 10 AT base pairs. So when polymerase transcribes an inverted repeat, this 20 nucleotides, the resulting RNA which is formed, it has so many complementary bases present in itself, which can form a hydrogen bond with each other, and that look like the structure look like a hairpin, and this pushes the entire RNA polymerase from away. So this is what I am saying. This is the sequence, inverted repeat, this blue color, and the end part of it, if you look at, there is the presence of AT base pairs, right? So when it is transcribed, both the sequences are transcribed, you will see that there is a presence of various complementary nucleotides present over here, which will form a hydrogen bond with itself, and this structure look like a hairpin structure, and it then it induces the conformational changes in the RNA polymerase, which finally results into the termination of a transcription. So till this we have seen the formation of pre-mRNA. Now let's look at how the actual or how the functional mRNA is actually produced from the pre-mRNA. There are two different things which are done. First is a capping. In this, if you look at, there is a series of reactions which will occur. The first is nothing but there is a removal of the phosphate group from the 5' end, and later on the GMP moiety is added to that 5' end. Well, this linkage is something unusual. This is 5' to 5' linkage, because usually if you look at 5' phosphate always form a bond with a 3' hydroxyl group, right? But here it is something different. 5' phosphate forms a bond with a 5' phosphate of the coming GMP. And lastly, the methyl group is added into the 7th nitrogen atom of that guanidinate. So this is the reaction I am saying. So imagine that this is your newly formed RNA, pre-mRNA, right? So this alpha, beta and gamma, it has 3 phosphates. So this gamma phosphate will be released, okay, and this beta phosphate will attack on the alpha phosphate of the coming GTP, right, which will result into the formation of this 5' cap. Still it is not complete cap, because in this we are supposed to add the methyl group, as I said, that will be added on to the 9th nitrogen. So this is called as 5' cap, right? It protects the internal part of the mRNA, because there are chances that there are certain endonucleases which will cleave the RNA which has recently been produced with the help of transcription. The second thing which protects the internal part is nothing but the polyadenylation. That means capping is done at the 5' side, and the polyadenylation, it is done at the 3' end. Well, there is an enzyme called as polymerase, which adds approximately 200 adenines to the 3' end of the RNA. And obviously this enzyme uses ATP as a precursor all the time. Those adenylate which are added, those adenylate are brought from the ATP. And this mature mRNA is then transported into the cytoplasm. The raw material which is required for the translation, there are so many things which are required. First is a functional mRNA, the synthesis of which we have just gone through, which should have the 5' cap. Then at the 3' it should have poly A tail, it should have start codon, it should have stop codon. Okay, everything is there. Then the next which is required is a complete assembly of the ribosome, larger subunit, smaller subunit. Then the transfer RNA, tRNA, and along with this there should be presence of certain factor, initiation factor 1, 2 and 3, certain number of GTPs, then some factors TU, TS, and then some amino acids, obviously 20 natural amino acids. So these are nothing but the entire raw material which is required for the translation process. Now let's try to see each of this raw material in a detail. Okay, so mRNA, it is already done. A ribosome, if you look at this prokaryotic ribosome and eukaryotic ribosomes, I'm trying to depict here. Eukaryotic ribosome, complete assembly is made up of 60S and 40S. Together they make up the 80S. So 60S in turn, if you look at, it is made up of 5.8 srRNA, 5S rRNA, 28 srRNA, and about 49 proteins. So there is no need to remember these values. Remember, no exam like NET, SET, GET, they never ask you that which is the rRNA present in the 60S of ribosome. But the last part I would ask you to remember, the 16S rRNA. If you look at the prokaryotic ribosome, especially the smaller subunit of ribosome, it is made up of 16S rRNA and about 21 proteins. So this 16S rRNA, this is very important from the taxonomic point of view, because it has been seen that this 16S rRNA has the presence of conserved sequences into it. Within the species, if you consider, there are certain sequences which will be present onto this rRNA. They will be conserved, right? And for a given species, they are always constant. They never change. From generation to generation, they have been preserved. And that is the reason whenever you report certain bacteria, that it is new bacteria probably which has been found by me, and if you submit your culture for the identification, they will isolate nothing but the 16S rRNA from that bacteria, and they will find out whether that sequence present in the 16S rRNA is present in their given database or not. If it is already present, then I'm sorry, your reported bacteria is not new. It has already been reported, right? Fine. So you have to remember all these assemblies, small, large, and then their respective rRNA, and then respective number of polypeptides. Okay. Next is a tRNA. tRNA. This is the complete structure of tRNA. This is called as chloroleaf model, right? There are various complementary nucleotides which will form a hydrogen bond with each other, and that is the reason due to that the tRNA will attain this shape like this, right? And within this you will see that there are various loops, or some books also say that it is having arms. Just for example, there is acceptor arm, okay, then DHU, then T size C over here. Every name which is given here has some meaning. Just for instance, acceptor arm. Why this is called as acceptor arm? Because it accepts the amino acid. I'm going to tell you later on how these amino acids are added to this point. But remember, within this tRNA in a 3' position, there is a sequence called as CCA. So this A, last A, adenylate, in this there is the addition of the amino acid. Then there is this T size C or T size U loop. This psi is basically pseudo. Pseudo means which is not true. Why this is not true nucleotide? It is because if you look at this is a normal nucleotide where you can see that the linkage between the ribose sugar and the nitrogen base, it is something like this. If it is a purine, it is always your N9, and if it is pyrimidine, then it is always N1. So either N1 or N9 is attached to the C1 prime of the ribose. But in this, if you look at this nucleotide, the bond which is there in between the ribose and a nitrogen base, it is in between C1 prime of ribose and the fifth element of the nitrogen base, and that is why it is not a true nucleotide. It's a pseudo nucleotide. Doesn't matter it is a C or U, but these are pseudo nucleotides. And here if you come, which is called as DHU, dihydrouracil, basically the uracil is like this, 2,4-dioxypyrimidine, okay. But here you see that in between the 5 and 6 there is a double bond in a normal nucleotide, but in this double bond is converted into a single bond by addition of 1 or 2 extra hydrogens. So there is no single bond, okay, there is no double bond over here. So this is called as dihydrouracilate. Fine. And these are the nucleotides which are present in this loop, therefore it is called as a DHU loop. And this pseudo nucleotide is present in this loop, therefore it is called as T psi U or T psi C loop. And this is a anticodon loop. Over here you see these are the nucleotides which will form a hydrogen bond with the actual codon which is present on the mRNA. So there is a pairing between codon and anticodon. Therefore this is called as anticodon. Okay, so these are the various loops and the arms which are present in the tRNA. Then moving ahead, the question is about how the particular amino acid is attached to the particular tRNA, right? We have 20 different amino acids, and what about tRNA? Is it like one tRNA it will attach to all the amino acids? No, the answer is for 20 different amino acids there are various amino acids which are present, and 20 different enzymes which are taking care of selecting particular amino acid and adding that to particular tRNA. So for an enzyme there are two challenges: selecting particular tRNA, and second is selecting appropriate or perfect amino acid. Okay, that we will see later on, that how that fidelity is actually maintained, how that accuracy is maintained. But for a while now, just consider how that amino acid is added onto the tRNA. So these are the reactions, a sequence of reactions which will at the end add the amino acid on the adenylate. Now if you look at the adenylate, there are two different hydroxyl group present in the adenine on which the amino acid can be added. So the question is, if it has two options, then on which hydroxyl group the enzyme will add the amino acid? The answer is, as there are equal chances, so it may happen that the amino acid can be added on the second hydroxyl group over here, or it can be added on the third hydroxyl. But the ultimate tRNA, which is having the amino acid tagged onto it, always has the amino acid attached to the 3' hydroxyl group of the ribose. That means, if at all, by mistake, if the amino acid is attached on the second 2' hydroxyl group, then from 2' hydroxyl group, it is transferred to the 3' hydroxyl group. And this is the reason why we are having two different classes of amino acid tRNA synthetases. Okay, I forgot to tell you, this is the name of that enzyme which take care of selecting particular amino acid and adding that on a selective tRNA. Okay, so class 1 amino acid tRNA synthetases will always add the amino acid on the second hydroxyl group, 2' hydroxyl group, and class 2 amino acid tRNA synthetases, they will add the amino acid on the 3' hydroxyl group. Remember, class 1 on 2' hydroxyl group and class 2 on 3' hydroxyl group. So the reaction is something like this. In the very first, the respective amino acid is reacted with the ATP, and then the result of this, the product of this, nothing but aminoacyl AMP, is then handed over to either class 1 or class 2 amino acid tRNA synthetases. So as usual, as I said, if it is given to the class 1 amino acid tRNA synthetases, then this complete assembly will be then transferred onto the 2' hydroxyl group. So here you can see it is on 2' hydroxyl group. And if it is given to the class 2 amino acid tRNA synthetases, then the amino acid along with this adenosine, that will be attached onto the 3' hydroxyl group. And as I said, from the 2' hydroxyl group, it is always given to the 3' hydroxyl group. So this is one extra reaction it has to carry. Okay, so this is with the help of transesterification. But at the end you will see that all the amino acids are added onto the 3' hydroxyl group. So if you see here, this aminoacyl AMP, when it was delivered or when it was handed over to the respective amino acid tRNA synthetases, it doesn't directly go into the active site. Well, on all these amino acid tRNA synthetases, there is one extra pocket which is called as editing pocket, which is just to enhance the fidelity of this amino acid tRNA synthetases. So this will come again when we will look at the fidelity. Now this is the time to discuss the fidelity, the accuracy of the amino acid tRNA synthetases. The frequency of the mischarging is very low. If you consider, it is only 0.1%. That means 1 in 1000 tRNA is charged with the incorrect amino acid. The obvious question is, how is this possible? How the selection of particular tRNA and a perfect amino acid is done? Well, this is easy to understand when there is a great difference between the R groups of amino acids. Suppose we have glycine and we have tryptophan on the other hand. Then the enzyme can differentiate between these two amino acids based on their R group. One is very small, the other is very large, plus having one aromatic ring present into it. But what about those amino acids which are having almost same R groups? So just for instance, I have taken the example of these two amino acids, tyrosine and phenylalanine. Almost same R groups are there. Only the difference in the tyrosine is the presence of hydroxyl group. So this small difference also helps the amino acid tRNA synthetases for the tyrosine to differentiate it from the phenylalanine, because this hydroxyl group present on the tyrosine, it has the ability to form the hydrogen bonds with some of the amino acid present in the active site of tyrosyl tRNA synthetases, and which the phenylalanine tRNA synthetase cannot do. The second difference, if you want to see, is this one, the isoleucine and a valine. Here also you see the R groups are almost similar. There is only one extra methyl group present in the isoleucine. So what is the mechanism over here? The answer lies in the free energy of both the reactions. Size-wise, both isoleucine and valine, they can fit into the active site of isoleucyl tRNA synthetases. But interaction with the extra methyl group which is there on the isoleucine, it provides extra free energy for its reaction. How much? -2 to -3 kilocalorie per mole. And even this minute difference in the free energy change, it will make the binding to isoleucine 100 times more as compared to binding to the valine. And this is the reason why the isoleucyl tRNA synthetases can differentiate in between the isoleucine and valine. And yes, there is another level where the fidelity is maintained. That's nothing but I have previously told you that on every amino acid tRNA synthetases, along with the active site, there is one extra site which is called as editing pocket. So every amino acid tRNA, when it is handed over to the amino acid tRNA synthetases, before attaching into the active site, it is sent first into that editing pocket. And if at all the enzyme recognizes that this is not the correct amino acid, that is actually broken in the editing pocket. And if it is a right, then only it is then given to the active site of the enzyme. So it was all about the raw material which is required for the translation. We tried to go in much detail about all the raw materials like mRNA, rRNA, tRNA and so on. Now this is time to look at the actual translation. So as usual, all these raw materials now in a sequence, it is going to come together and carry out the process. So there is a sequence, like which element of the translation will come first and which one will come later. Just for instance, the reaction starts with the smaller subunit of ribosome and some of the initiation factors like IF1 and IF2. So there is a restricted positions where the IF1 and IF3 will attach. Just for instance, the IF2 always attaches to the A site and IF3 attaches to the E site. Well, this A site, P site and E site, these are nothing but a small cleft which will be generated when the smaller subunit and a larger subunit of ribosomes will combine, right? And it has been seen that A and P, these sites, they are actually associated with the smaller subunit, whereas E is actually related, or it is supposed to be a part of the larger subunit. So IF1 attaches to A, IF3 attaches to E site, and then this ribosomal subunit, smaller subunit of ribosome, and then this IF1 and IF3, it sits on the mRNA and literally slides on the mRNA till it reaches to the initiation codon IUG. Well, here's something which needs focus. How the smaller subunit of ribosome come to know that it is the smaller subunit, it is a initiation codon AUG and I have to fit over there. And this attachment is a very typical. That means AUG will always come in the P site. Here you can see that AUG has come in the P site of the smaller subunit. So how is this possible? The reason behind this is the Shine-Dalgarno sequence. The scientist who have discovered this, in the honor of his name, the sequence is called as Shine-Dalgarno sequence, and that sequence is a part of this 16S rRNA. If you remember, when we were looking into the ribosomes, the smaller subunit of prokaryotic system, it was consisting of a 16S rRNA. So there is a sequence present on this. You can Google that, you can get that, you can see the reference books also, that sequence, and the sequence present on the mRNA, okay, towards the 5' site from the initiation codon. These two sequences are exactly complementary. Which one? The sequence present on the 5' site of the AUG start codon and the Shine-Dalgarno sequence present in the smaller subunit of ribosome. They are complementary to each other. So when your ribosome is sliding on the mRNA, when it is gliding on the mRNA, the point where these two sequences come in front of each other, they will form a hydrogen bonding, and that's the point where the smaller subunit stops. And fortunately, the AUG then comes in the P site. It is then followed by, as usual, we are having the tRNA addition in this. Okay, now tRNA, every time remember, for the attachment of the tRNA, there is a requirement of energy, because this is energy requiring process. So that energy is always provided by GTP, and that GTP is brought into picture by this IF2. So when IF2 and this aminoacyl tRNA synthetases along with the appropriate amino acid, it comes here, you will see that in the last phase all these initiation factors will be released. How this is possible? Because this GTP, when it is hydrolyzed, the energy which is released from that, it helps all these initiation factors to released from the smaller subunit. And IF3, which was attached at the E site, the function of this is something, it always inhibit the larger subunit to come and bind to the smaller subunit. But as there is no IF3 present in this, because it has been released by the energy which is actually generated by the hydrolysis of GTP. So there is no IF3 over here, and that's the reason now the larger subunit also comes and bind to the smaller subunit. And as usual, now this is something complete structure which is there in the initiation. So this is larger subunit, this is smaller subunit, then A site, P site and E site. Now you see carefully that in the A site the codon is hydrogen, it is forming a hydrogen bond with the anticodon present onto the tRNA, and the tRNA is having the F-met amino acid attached to it. Well, this is something which you should remember, that F-met is always present when there is a bacterial cell, but if it is the eukaryotic system, then there is simple methionine. Right, now you may consider that always if it is the first amino acid which is added, then every protein in a bacteria or in the animal cell, just for example eukaryotic cells, it must be constant. Just for instance, in prokaryotic it should be F-met, and that is formal methionine, and in a eukaryotic system it should be methionine always, the first amino acid. Whereas if you look at the database and see the first amino acid present in all amino acid, it is hardly possible that there are certain proteins in which you will see the presence of F-met or the normal methionine. Why? Because these amino acids are then cleaved once the complete polypeptide is synthesized. That is a part of a post-translational modification, right? But during synthesis you must remember that if it is a prokaryotic cell, the first amino acid has to be F-met, formal methionine, and if it is a eukaryotic system, then it has to be just a methionine. So this is the complete initiation complex acid which is formed at the end of the initiation, and then comes the elongation. Elongation has 3 different stages. So in the first stage, if you see, in the initiation complex where there is one ribosome, smaller subunit, larger subunit, and only one tRNA till now, the second tRNA with the second amino acid now will come in picture, and it will be accepted at the A site. As usual, it also requires energy, so that is given by GTP. This time it is not attached to any initiation factor, but it is attached to a TU. So the TU GTP, it helps for the attachment of the second amino acid by the second tRNA. And here you can see that this tRNA has occupied its position on the second genetic code, right? And then this GTP is hydrolyzed into GDP. So this TU-GDP has to recycle back for the welcoming of the third amino acid, and that is achieved by 2 different reactions. Okay, in the first, the TS replaces this GDP, so TS combines with the TU. So TU and TS, then this complex, it reacts with the GTP, where the GTP replaces the TS, and then finally you have the TU GTP. Reaction of peptidyl transferase. The name itself says peptidyl transferase, means the first amino acid will be transferred to the second amino acid, and this activity is not performed by any other external enzyme, but it is thought to be present in the larger subunit of ribosome, right? So here is the reaction. You can see that the lone pair present on the amino group of the second amino acid, it attacks the carbonyl carbon which is present in the first amino acid, and doing this, the first amino acid will be transferred onto the second amino acid. So here this is the reaction, and Due to this, the first tRNA, it will remain vacant. This is called as ghost tRNA because it is not having any amino acid attached to it, and then later on it leaves. Okay, so here you can see now on the second tRNA we are having two amino acids. This one is the second and this one is the first. Now that will be then entering into the third stage. That's nothing but a translocation phase. Means what? The entire ribosome now going to shift themselves through one genetic code. That means from 5' to 3' they will always move, and if they shift through one genetic code, then obviously one thing will happen, that whatsoever is present in A, that will automatically come in the P, and whatsoever is present in P, that will come in the E, and something if it is present in the E, that will leave from the ribosome. And that is which will happen here. See now, this second tRNA was present in the A site, right? Here I forgot to tell you one thing, that every tRNA except the first, I repeat, every tRNA except the first tRNA, when it comes in the protein synthesis, it is accepted at A site, whereas it's only the first tRNA which is accepted at the P site. And the role of IF1 is this, that it will always make sure in the first stage itself, during the initiation complex, that the first tRNA which is coming, it should not get attached to the A site. And that is why first it comes and bind to the A site. If you want me to go, we can see that. See this IF1, it is attaching to the A site, so that it will make sure that the first tRNA, if it is coming, it will not occupy the A site. So here there is only one site which is empty, not the A, not the E, but it is P, and that's the reason the first tRNA attaches to the P side, and later the tRNA which is coming, that will be added onto the A site. So during the translocation process, as I said, whatsoever is present in A, it will come in P, and the things which are present in P will come in E. So the translocation process requires energy that is actually given by GTP. So this is elongation factor G having GTP attached to it, which hydrolyzes into GDP and PI, and that released energy will help the ribosome to shift through one genetic code from 5' to 3'. So here the second tRNA was in A, now it is in P, and the first tRNA was in P, now it is in the E site, and A site is now vacant, it is empty, which will welcome the third tRNA with the third amino acid tagged onto it, and then the stage 2 will repeat. That is nothing but the peptidyl transferase, and this time not one amino acid but two amino acids will be transferred from the second tRNA to the third tRNA, okay, on the third amino acid. So it's not only amino acid which is transferring, sometimes there is a peptide also which is transferred, and that is why the name of the enzyme is a peptidyl transferase. Okay, so the stage 2 and stage 3, that means peptidyl transferase and translocation. Peptidyl transferase and translocation, it will keep on repeating. So initially you had only one amino acid, now you will have 2, then 3, and then 4. All right. So likewise we are having multiple amino acids added into the growing polypeptide chain. Okay, and In this manner, it will keep on shifting. Ribosome will keep on shifting from 5' to 3', and at the end, when the entire machinery reaches to the termination sequences or stop codons like UAG, UGA and UAA, the entire complex of the translation process, it is collapsed. It dissociates from each other. Each and every individual component of the complex dissociates from each other, and it is done by 3 different releasing factor or termination factors like RF1, RF2 and RF3. They carry out various functions. Just for instance, they will break the last peptidyl tRNA bond, as well as they will dissociate the smaller subunit and a larger subunit of both prokaryotic and eukaryotic system. Okay, with the help of this, the newly formed polypeptide, now it will be released in the cytoplasm. Okay, so this is all about the translation process. I hope you have understood and enjoyed the part. Well, due to time constraint, I understand there I could not include many important topics like RNA splicing. The best one is a genetic code. Then here we could include the post-translational modifications also. But due to time constraints, I had to complete the transcription and translation process. Okay, but it's not like that they are not important. If I have not included here, they are equally important. Which one? Splicing, then the genetic code, and the third one, post-translational modification. Okay, so I leave that part up to you, and I wish you a very good luck for your all entrances, GATE, SET, NET, whatsoever the entrance will come with related to the life sciences, you all should appear for it. Alright, and I have given my contact detail in my first slide itself. So I wish you again best luck for our entrances. Thank you so much.